No damsels in distress, no pretty castles, there's no such thing as a Robin Hood. Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're continuing on from Series 8 with The Robot of Sherwood, written by Mark Gatiss and is directed by Paul Murphy, which is his first story for the series. Now, Mark Gatiss has been a prolific writer for Doctor Who, has been written many stories in the revived era, all the way up from Doctor Who's, the revived eras of Doctor Who's third episode. So him doing the third ever episode of the Peter Capaldi era. I think he also did, I can't remember when Victory of the Daleks came out, but that could have been the third episode in that as well. So Mark Gatiss has written the third episode for three of the first four revival era Doctor Who's. Yes? I can't remember how many he wrote until he got to David Tennant, but that's beside the point. So, he has a massive history with the show, and he has a very particular way of writing for the series. Well, I say particular, he has two kind of writing styles. Mainly, in each case, they're set in the past, and they revolve around or experiencing by historical events or people. Winston Churchill, Charles Dickens, with the Crimson Horror. It's not really any. It's like one of the few ones that he did that's not tied into any historical value. The Idiot's Lantern with the Queen's coronation, and he always has that kind of feel to it. But when he goes at, there's two kinds of stories that he does with this. He either takes the horror inspired with The Unquiet Dead and The Crimson Horror, which is personally where I love him, because we can clearly tell he has this passion for horror. If you haven't seen his documentary on horror films that aired on BBC Three, about a year or two before this episode aired, I highly recommend it. But he also does a much more comical, light-hearted, almost caricature versions of historical events, like with Victory of the Daleks and The Idiot's Lantern, where though there is this darker underlying story, although there is a morbid element to his narratives, they're mainly played as fun adventures, mainly, and focus mainly on not exactly just being a fun story, but it is one of the bigger elements of their narrative. It's nothing like Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, where it is mainly focused on fun. Until we start tackling this story, as Mark Gatiss actually takes this style of his writing style and applies it to not actually a real life figure, or at least not the one that we know of, because the history of this character is a folklore. He's actually, there is a small chance, from what I can gather, I'm not a historian or anything, but the way it's worded, this person might have been real, might have not, most likely isn't. And that is the fictional representation of Sir Robin Hood. Okay, he's not Sir, but he's Robin Hood, and his band of merry men. People who steal from the rich and give to the poor. And essentially, this story starts off with Clara asking the Doctor, he's like, right, you're never going to believe this, but I've always wanted to meet Robin Hood. They go back to the time of Robin Hood during the medieval times, and they actually encounter Robin Hood. And that is the narrative of the story. And like I said, this story has much more tied with Dinosaurs on a Spaceship than any other works of Mark Gatiss, in that this story only has one pure objective for its audience. Just enjoy and have a blast for the runtime. We're not asking you to go into any deep physiological debates, discussion, though the story does tease elements of that. But here, the story is, again, mainly focused on having a fun, blast time. When this story first aired back in 2014, the story was kind of a mixed bag. A lot of people seemed to really enjoy this episode and have a lot of, and enjoyed it. However, it was theorised, I don't know if it was ever clear or not, but it was theorised that this story was written prior to Matt Smith's regenerating, or at least before Matt Smith decided to leave, as this story feels like it would have fitted perfectly in the 11th Doctor era, with a much more quirky Doctor and a much more quirky inspired setting and surroundings. Nothing here that really strikes that dark persona that was teased upon in advertisements for this series, and more specifically with the 12th Doctor. Here, we basically have the Doctor and Robin Hood bantering off on each other in a similar way that the 11th Doctor would, with another character that he would basically be competing for the affections of Clara or Amy Pond. And so that was heavily criticised for it. However, over time, time has not been well to this story. A lot of people now look on this story with cringe and disappointment. But the story had certain ideas, certain elements that could have been pushed forward to make a great story. However, the story just takes a mediocre turn for each adventure, for each development in the narrative. What do I mean by that? Well, I'll get onto that when we talk about the so-called twist of the narrative. I mean, the story is called Robot of Sherwood. The robots isn't exactly the surprise of the story, but something about that maybe. And so, yeah, and that is, yeah, so basically it's Mark Gatiss' style of writing, mainly focusing on the fun elements, but with, instead of a historical character, a historical figure, it's a folklore hero of Robin Hood. And Robin Hood here is played by Tom Riley, who was more famous at the time for playing Leonardo da Vinci in a TV series that aired around about the same time. It was actually filmed in Swansea Bay. I can't remember what it's called. I want to say it's the Da Vinci Code, but it's not. I mean, it might have just called Da Vinci. I can't remember. But he was a big actor at the time. So for Doctor Who to get him as a guest star at his prime, essentially, it was a pretty big deal. So yeah, that's basically the summarise at the start of the story before we get into the narrative at hand. As I stated earlier on in the story has Clara basically asked the Doctor to be taking her to see Robin Hood, and the Doctor is completely, it's like he's fictional, he's not real, it's made up, it's ridiculous, and that is kind of interesting. It does kind of mean that Clara, the fact that Clara doesn't know that Robin Hood isn't a fictional character, seeing as her history is very similar to ours, only that she's met the Doctor. Kind of makes her feel a lot more childlike. Not childlike, but she has this kind of fangirl kind of experience of the story. And there's this actually kind of a great little narrative here, right in the pre-credit sequence, where the Doctor is challenging Clara's perception of what's real or not. Despite Robin Hood doing nothing really out of the ordinary that no human can't do in real life. What Robin Hood does is spectacular, what is great in his stories, but it's nothing that no ordinary human with a massive amount of skill couldn't do. It's not like he has any superpowers or goes up to space and stuff. So when the Doctor, right at the start of the episode, gets confronted by Robin Hood, I keep calling him Robert Holmes. I've got Doctor Who in mind. He is still completely baffled by the idea of Robin Hood. I keep doing this the entire video. Now, it is interesting that's one of the things. The story has a lot of interesting ideas in here, with Doctor and Clara debating whether Robin Hood is real or not. But the story always goes out of its way to just move on to the next bit. As soon as the Doctor steps out of the TARDIS, he is confronted by Robin Hood. And though the Doctor is still like question it, the story quickly shifts from that dynamic of the Doctor trying to disprove that this is Robin Hood, and Clara is just in fascination that she's meeting her icons in real life. And it's like, this is amazing, this is absolutely fantastic. The real life folklore legend Robin Hood in my presence. But like, you could have had like an extra bit where they come out the TARDIS and they like, the Doctor and Clara debating about this, and the Doctor is feeling like overly confident maybe that, that he's in the right, there is no such thing as Robin Hood. But that kind of gets squished to the side, leaving for this aspect of the story which has the Doctor have some really humorous moments. He fights Robin Hood at the start of the story, probably one of the most famous scenes in the story, where Robin Hood fights the Doctor with a sword. But the Doctor doesn't have a sword, he doesn't carry a sword. He is the Doctor and he has a spoon. Again, this is a complete 180 on the 12th Doctor that we were introduced in Deep Breath, which was quirky, but he had a lot of deep, darker moments, and in Into the Dalek, where that story ended with the Dalek introducing to the Doctor that he is a good Dalek. And now we have a story like, if you go marathonic wise, this scene takes place only a few minutes after that, and the Doctor is fighting Robin Hood with a spoon. It is pretty silly, and this is what I was on about, where it kind of feels like something that the 11th Doctor would do, something a bit more silly, a bit more light-hearted, something that we weren't really expecting to a degree with the 12th Doctor. But I think this was actually a creative decision choice, as I guess there was a fear of sorts that if people didn't agree to this darker Doctor, history would repeat itself with the 6th Doctor. For those of you who don't know, the 6th Doctor was also an incarnation which the production team wanted a darker, much more methodical incarnation, and because of poor writing, because of poor understanding of how that character is portrayed in that way, a lot of people quickly distanced themselves from the 6th Doctor, and I guess the production team really was worried about that, so they needed a light-hearted story where, though the Doctor himself is still the grumpy, sarcastic incarnation, it's much more done for like laughter and humour. Nothing really too funny that makes you laugh out loud, but there are some like humorous moments where the Doctor, one of my favourite lines is actually when the Doctor takes a blood sample of one of the merry men, and it's like, if you were real, with the amount of diseases in your blood, you'd be dead in about 4 months. And it's like, I am real. Well, well then. And then the Doctor kind of walks off, and all the merry men and Robin Hood is laughing and stuff, and the Doctor's just like, right, that's not even funny, that's bantering. I am totally against bantering. And that basically summarises the entire story in terms of their relationship. And that's the thing which I think separates my opinion from this story from another story which does a very similar thing on just wants to take the story as pure fun, with Dinosaurs in a Spaceship. With Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, though yes, it is, again, like I said, all about fun and environment, the story always gives you something new, something interesting to work off on. If it's the characters being split up, different dynamics, seeing the villains and their interaction with our characters, and certain ideologies that get on here. But here, the majority of the first half of the story is mainly this humorous debate, and though it is fun, though it is humorous, when you watch it for a second time, these scenes can get really dull. And when you know all the jokes and stuff, you're like, okay, come on, get to the more interesting aspects of the story. Now, one thing as well we need to introduce is the villain, the Sheriff of Nottingham, played by the amazing actor Ben Miller, who many people have cited that his his character, both looks and is characterised very similar to Anthony Ainley's incarnation of the Master. In fact, going from this story, I would have thought Ben Miller would have been a brilliant incarnation of the Master. And it was kind of a disappointment that his acting, in particular in this mastery way, this evilest way, was put into this story in Doctor Who, basically stating it's like, right, we're never going to get that, because even if he did come back, you'd have to separate that from his previous role. And you can't have that as the Master, but that's beside the point. With his character, he basically plays the mustache-twirling villain. There's even a scene, I'm not even joking, this is an actual thing that happens. He's looking at a map of England, and he's just pointing at like places he likes, and it's just like, mine, 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 mine. I was almost like expecting like Austin Powers to walk in. It's so comically cheesy. However, Ben Miller plays it with such serious. It's something which I feel like purely on the script, this character would fail miserably. There's nothing really to him, apart from a few twisted turns at the end of the narrative. But he has, but Ben Miller really nails this character, and really, despite him being a very cliched villain, and a lot of his plans really don't make any sense. We'll get onto the contest in a bit. But the way he plays it really makes this villain memorable, and the way like he interprets Mark Gatiss' lines, like he genuinely believes like he does, like he owns everything. It's really captivating to watch. One of my favourite scenes is actually when he's trying to talk to Clara, and Clara basically tricks him into believing that she knows everything. So it's like, you may as well tell us like our stories of like how we interacted with alien technology. And so he kind of goes on his story and stuff about it. It's a very, again, it's nothing too special. It's nothing we've seen like 100 times before. In fact, many elements of the story people have pointed out, and I totally agree, is that there's many similarities to this story and the third Doctor story, The Time Warrior. But instead of Sontarans, it's robots, and the characters here are based off folklore characters. But it's a very similar process where an alien ship has crash landed onto Earth, migrated into the culture, mainly a castle, where somebody within that medieval culture, a barren, ruthless character uses this and has kind of like a one-to-one agreement with the alien intruders to try and take over the world using their weapons and technology, and it's up to the Doctor to befriend the locals and conquer this threat. So in that state, this story is very similar to that, and that's one of the big issues with Series 8 at the moment. Many stories, especially, I mean, we're only 3 stories in, and we've already got the Time Warrior, something the story has done in the Time Warrior. Into the Daleks is a combination of Dalek, Evil of the Daleks, and the Invisible Enemy. And Deep Breath has many similarities to the Christmas Invasion, with the Doctor being temporarily ill and out of the action for a while. And the Girl in the Fireplace, which again ties it again into this story. We'll get into that in a bit. But one of the big issues is with the 12th Doctor era, at least in the first half of his era, there's nothing really new presented to us. The stories, though good or bad or whatever, don't really have anything new to go for. It's just the repeat of the same old things. And that is a heavily justified criticism with the Stephen Moffat era to this point. So, now out of the way, let's go on to one of the stupidest things in this story. We essentially learn around about the same time that the main villains, the robots and the Sheriff of Nottingham, are trying to take as much gold as possible. They need the gold to refuel the ship of the robots, so they can get back into the atmosphere and fly off, escaping their earthly confinements. And the Doctor is like, you can see it theorised, it's like, right, if the ship goes up, it will explode. Again, very similar to the Time Warrior. But at around about the same time, we also learn that the sheriff is making this contest, a contest of archery, to trick Robin Hood to come out of his shell, essentially, and get captured by the robots. But the prize of this is an arrow of gold. Mind you, this is the vital component they need, material they need for their ship, for their craft. And we later learn at the very end of the episode that that one arrow might be enough gold for them to at least escape the Earth's atmosphere. So why the hell did they make that the prize of the contest? Like, what? That is just such a stupid plan on behalf of the sheriff. That's the equivalent of me needing coal to survive. Maybe, I don't know, like I'm in a freezing house and there's no heating or anything, so I need coal. But then to get my enemies out, I trick them by saying it's like, oh, I've got there's a prize, and whoever wins, I get this coal. And I actually used like proper, like he could just like lie. He couldn't just give another prize. I mean, he's the sheriff. He doesn't need to hide, or, you know, he's got like other valuables in his possession. Why make an arrow of gold? Mind you, they must have made the arrow, and it's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. But it does lead into one of the more fun scenes of the story, the archery scene, in which the sheriff and Robin Hood, in disguise as Tommy the Twinkler or something like that. But it's clearly like it's just Robin Hood in a hat. I don't know if like at this moment in time the locals and the sheriff actually know who Robin Hood is. It's kind of confusing. I couldn't tell if this was a reference to, say, something like Superman, where the disguise is so clearly dumbfounded, but it clearly works as well in terms of the narrative. Like, all you need is glasses. All Robin Hood needs is a hat. Or whether it was sort of a disguise, a proper disguise, as nobody actually knows who Robin Hood is, apart from the merry men and maybe a few of the locals. Whether like the sheriff will actually know who Robin Hood is at this point, we don't know. And they challenged then for the arrow, only for the Doctor to get involved, and we have another big competing moment of the Doctor and Robin Hood, only for the Doctor, the 12th Doctor, being like, this is getting silly, this is getting ridiculous, and he uses his sonic screwdriver to basically blow up the target, and he basically asks the sheriff, like, he doesn't want the arrow, it's merely a trinket. I want enlightenment, I want to learn what is actually happening. And then we learn during a fight scene, a debate that, because everything basically goes off the rails, that the sheriff's armies are actually robots, and the Doctor's kind of putting these ideas together, and the Doctor basically theorizes that the villains are basically made fairy tale like land, and to inspire the locals to work harder is to basically give them a false sense of hope by creating a android Robin Hood. At least that's the idea, and that's actually works really well. That kind of actually makes sense if you think about it. That actually makes sense in terms of the arrow as well. If Robin Hood is actually working for the bad guys, he is actually a robot, then there's actually no worry into giving him the arrow, because he'll just give it back. It's just mainly for appearances, in case somebody, examines the arrow of some sort. And that actually makes sense. And the Doctor has to team up with Robin, as stated earlier on, Clara goes, has a meeting with the sheriff, and the doctor and Robin have this really funny moment where they have to try to distract the guard, and the doctor gets Robin Hood to like moan and stuff, and the doctor tells like, oh, like he's soiled himself, and Robin Hood clearly just like, you can tell in his face he's not comfortable with this at all. And Robin Hood's this cheerful, bombastic character. Now, Tom Riley, like I said earlier on, is an icon in British television, especially at the time. Like I said, he starred in that Da Vinci show, and he was at the top of his fame at the moment. To have him in Doctor Who was a really big grab at the time. We might have forgotten about him now, but he was a big star back in 2014. It was kind of ridiculous. It's like having, like, I don't know, Chris Pratt in it now. Okay, maybe that's a bit of an extreme, but you get the idea. And though how he plays Robin Hood is fun, it's energetic, it has a very similar issue with the sheriff, in that the character is written so clichély. When you think of Robin Hood, you kind of think of this, the laughing too hard. He has to do like this all the time and boast and have a massive like ego, a sense. But he always has the kind heart, and he has this dark romantic side as he longs to be reunited with his loved one. Which, by the way, that whole storyline just really doesn't work. It just really doesn't work. But the main enthusiasm, the way the story really works, is the actor Tom Riley doing a fantastic job here at playing the particular character. And I love the scene then where the doctor, this is another thing I was talking about earlier on in the story, the doctor basically finds the engine room of the ship that's disguised itself as the castle, and the doctor basically learns that the gold is a fuel mechanism for the ship, and he basically tries to convince Robin Hood that he's not real. He shows even images of history of the folklore, and even some images of like famous movie and TV appearances. Now, this is actually very interesting as a Doctor Who fan, as it actually shows the first ever actor to play Robin Hood on TV, Patrick Troughton. And the whole idea of canon just gets swept under the rug for a minute. So, is Patrick Troughton a real guy in the Doctor Who universe? Or did the second Doctor become an actor for a short while and acted as Robin Hood in the canon of the show? God damn you, Mark Gatiss. Or Paul Murphy. Paul Murphy, I want to say as well. Paul Murphy, this is his first time directing a Doctor Who story. He does a fantastic job here. I feel like a lot of the scenes are a bit too clean for a medieval period. And I feel like it's not the greatest Doctor Who debut in terms of directing. But he does a great job. A lot of scenes look nice and polished. Though, like I said, maybe a bit too polished for a medieval setting. I would have liked to have a little bit of dirt, a little bit of ruggedness in the look of the story. You can definitely feel that this is a TV story, which is something we haven't actually had in a while, because we've had so many great, strong directors. Nothing against Paul Murphy, by the way. Nothing against him at all. You know, Doctor Who is a very difficult job. Like, he has to basically get the idea of medieval times in one episode of a TV series. That must be extraordinarily difficult. I'm just stating that in recent memory, in terms of where Doctor Who is at the moment, we've had so many really strong directors that it kind of made it look like that he did a bad job. But no, he didn't. He did a great job. It's just, compared to previous directors in recent memories, it wasn't as strong. Again, no shame or anything on Paul Murphy. Fantastic director. Just wish it was a little bit more dirty in certain cases. A bit more rough in the a hands-on approach, shall we say, than the more clean and polished look at the story. I don't think really called for. And so let's get into the ending. But first of all, the robots. The Doctor uses wibbly wobbly tiny whiny stuff to basically look on the scanners and discover where these robots are going. They're going to the Promised Lands. This ties into the story arc that was reintroduced in Deep Breath and was first time seen in the 10th Doctor story, The Girl in the Fireplace, where we have these robots that are trying to turn themselves human and turn them, and then trying to go to this so-called Promised Lands, which may or may not be a metaphor for heaven, or the afterlife of sorts, but that's basically the idea. That's basically the premise of the narratives, that these robots of the story arc. But here, I did kind of feel like this storyline was kind of forced onto the narrative, not in the sense that it distracts you from the story per se. I think they actually does a great job here of integrating that in that scene, integrating that plot line into this story. It just felt like this story wasn't in mind to that narrative. Because yes, this story does have robots trolling a ship that wants to trying to escape Earth's atmosphere. But here's the thing: these robots are not anywhere near to the two robot fractions that we've seen before. These robots seem to have no interest, though they do disguise themselves in people's culture. They seem to have no interest in turning themselves or using human parts, with the exception of like the slave work. So it kind of felt really strange in that narrative front, that it felt like a completely different villain that we tied into this storyline. Again, in terms of the overarching storyline, it actually kind of works because it doesn't feel too forced into the narrative. But in terms of the singular narrative itself, it doesn't actually feel like a, I guess, Promised Land robots, Clockwork robots. I don't know what you would call it. The Clockwork robot story. It's the equivalent of having a Dalek story, but they used. It's like what's that Sixth Doctor Dalek story? Reminiscence of Daleks, where they basically take the Daleks and do a Cyberman story with them, where they take human remains and turn them into Daleks, genetically engineering them, turning people into Daleks, harvesting them, hiding away. Very un-Dalek-y, more Cyberman-y. It's kind of a similar thing here, where we have generic robots put into a story of the Clockwork robots. But that's the thing. That's one of the strange aspects of the story. The story is called The Robot of Sherwood, not The Robots of Sherwood. There's actually an explanation of this, but it's in a deleted scene. But backtracking a bit, I forgot I need to talk about this. The idea of Robin Hood basically realizing that he's a robot, he might not be real. It's a really interesting aspect, and he's like, how dare you say I'm not a man? How dare you say that my legacy is forgotten and stuff like that, only to be used as stories in future. And he captures then Clara at one point, and he makes her, interrogates her for a bit, and then off screen, Clara convinces him to fight with the Doctor and still be his heroic side. You can clearly, there's something that was really interesting there, something really profound, something really interesting, and could have developed both Clara, the Doctor, and Robin Hood in interesting and new ways. But the story kind of completely forgets that to try and shove in the more, hey, this is a fun, light story, let's have the Robin Hood have his gallivanting action scene. Also as well, in terms of that twist that Robin Hood is actually a robot, the Doctor confronts the sheriff and is just like, right, bring back Clara, I know that Robin Hood is one of yours, and is like, what the hell are you on about? Why would we create our own enemy. That would be stupid. That would be ridiculous. And the Doctor's just like, yeah, that would be stupid. That would be ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense. Why would anyone do that? It doesn't make any sense. So most of the problems that would have fixed, the arrow arching scene, the two-dimensional way that these characters are written. Actually, no, it's not. These are the real people. These are real people. This is the real-life human Robin Hood. I like to think that my theory is that Robin Hood was a robot. It's just maybe his faction generally started believing he was Robin Hood, and he then fought against the sheriff or something. That's my idea. It's nothing that's actually integrated into the story. But yeah, there's also a thing where the sheriff out of nowhere basically proclaims that he is a new race of people, half man, half engine. And in the context of the story, it actually makes no sense. But there's actually a deleted scene which actually makes this, because there was a scene that was actually edited out of the story in respect to recent real-life events at the time, as two American journalists were beheaded on camera by ISIS. And so in respect for those two journalists, a beheading scene in this story was edited out. And essentially would have explained that the sheriff, the ship that crash landed actually landed on him, almost killing him, but the robot actually brought him back to life, and he's basically now an android. He's half human, half machine. And again, really interesting idea. And you can't blame the BBC for out of respect editing out that scene. It's an issue with the story, but I kind of understand why they did it. So I'm not really wanted to nail down that criticism with the story. But even if that was edited in, even if that was kept into the story, the twist happens so late and so naively. He has his head fixed on back onto his head after being decapitated, and he doesn't do anything out of the ordinary. He doesn't show his massive amounts of strength or power or anything like that. We actually get a final fight scene where it kind of recreates the Robin Hood and 12th Doctor fight at the start of the story, where Robin Hood puts his arms up and then he kind of flips behind the sheriff and knocks him down into a vase of acid, a vase of melted gold, and the ship is about to launch up into the air because it's got enough gold. And so our crew, they go outside and it's right, we have this arrow. If we shoot the arrow at the right spot in the ship, we can then hopefully get it out of orbit enough so that when it explodes, it wouldn't hurt Earth's atmosphere. It wouldn't destroy the countryside, killing all of these people, which is incredibly dumb. That one little piece of arrow, golden arrow, it was so contrived that golden arrow would be with our heroes. Because like I said, their plan doesn't make any lick of sense. And so the Doctor tries to fire it, but he actually doesn't know how to fight an arrow. And actually a nice little fun twist I liked is that it turned out that the Doctor was cheating in an archery scene earlier on, and he didn't actually know how to fire an arrow at all. And Robin Hood's arm is injured, so they team up and use the arrow to shoot up into the thing, so where it goes up into the atmosphere enough that it will destroy to space, so that nobody on Earth anyway would be injured or harmed by the effects of the destroyed ship. And the ending has them basically debating about Robin Hood's legacy, and he's just you know what, I'm fine with that. History is a burden. Stories will live after us, and we might not be heroes, Doctor. Me and you might not be heroes, tied into the whole "am I a good man" idea. But maybe people will be heroes in our name. And the Doctor leaves a gift where he leaves this girl that he meets in the dungeons, of the sheriff. This girl, which actually turns out to be Mary, the famed lover of Robin Hood. Again, that plot line really just does not work at the least. Like, the Mary character just seems like a nice, sweet character. Nothing important about her at all. You see at the start of the story, her father gets killed by the sheriff, and then most of the story then she's captured, helping some of the ill people who are slaves at the moment, and then team up with the Doctor to try and fight the robots. And in Robin Hood's point of view, he's just like, I long to one day meet Mary again, and then the story ends with them just meeting up again. It felt really weak. It didn't feel like this is that these two characters even had an interact. They didn't even like hug or even say anything to each other in this story. It felt really strange. It just felt really odd. And anyway, that is Robot of Sherwood. Overall, this story has a lot of good things going for it. It's fun, it's energetic. Paul Murphy, like I said, though he is one of the weakest directors that we've had in recent memory, he's still a really strong director. Peter Capaldi is amazing as always, and it's really great at doing this much more fun and much more dynamic Doctor. There's a lot of great humorous moments, not funny moments, but humorous moments. Tom Riley and Ben Miller, fantastic actors. But what really lets it down is a script that's doing the bare minimum. Nothing really bad, though there are some plot holes and issues in the narrative. But for the most part, the story is just okay. It seems like Mark Gatiss was writing this, maybe half asleep, maybe not too interested in the narrative. Something that, he could put together, show to people, they'll have fun with it, and then you kind of forget about it. And it is a crying shame, because this is a story that I know a lot of people were interested in when the story was being advertised and stuff. And we were kind of looking forward to a much more lighter-hearted Doctor Who story from the 12th Doctor. But, it's a bit of a shame. So anyway, that is the Robot of Sherwood. So join me next time when the Doctor goes out to try and solve one of the biggest mysteries of all time. That feeling, the tingling feeling that everyone in the universe gets. The feeling that you're in an empty room and you're not quite alone. The Doctor asks you, the audience, to come with him and hear out the biggest mystery in the universe. So join me next time for Listen, and I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-ra!